Life hack. All right, in this episode, we are going to go over some tips and tricks to make your woodworking life a lot easier, not just woodworking on some of them. First thing, we got a lot of tape measure tricks. I've said before in videos that FatMax tape measures are the best tape measures. That is very true. So one thing, you'll see it on a lot of tape measures. Of course, it just says it's the best one, and then this doesn't have it. But it'll actually have a measurement, usually under the little clip. It'll tell you just some random measurement. It'll probably say 3 inches and some odd, so 3 1/4, whatever. What's that telling you is that's telling you the width or the length of the tape measure itself, so that you can butt up against something inside and know that, hey, I see 7 inches plus the 3 1/4 that is the tape measure. So that's what that number indicates. Also, with the tape measure, you've got a handful of other little indicators. So, on a tape measure, you've got all sorts of extra markings. Obviously, you've got indications of the feet, but you also have these red, or they're not always red, sometimes they're other colors, and you've got these little diamonds up here. So, what the hell is all that? Well, the red markings are your 16 on center. And for those of you who don't frame houses or do anything like that, 16 on center is sort of a generic measurement for stud spacing. So in your wall, your studs are typically 16 inches apart. When they say 16 on center, that means if you were to measure from the center of one stud to the center of the next stud, it would be 16 inches. It's a good way of laying things out. Plus, things come in 4-foot sheets, which 16 matches up to 4 feet, and then 8 feet. And so everything kind of just comes together. So you put in the studs at 16 inches, and then you put your sheeting on the studs, and it helps to eliminate a lot of cutting. This is kind of the same idea. This is the 19-inch center stud spacing, because there's 3 stud or joist spacing. There's 16, there's the 19, and then there's 2 foot. 2 foot you don't see quite as much in studs. You'll see it more on a garage or a shed though, or you'll see it on truss spacing. So trusses and rafters in your roof, that's where you go the 2 foot centers. Some places, I've only ever done one house, they go 19s. It's kind of what the engineer designs. You can save yourself a couple of studs if you're building a small shed if you go 19s, but if you're doing that, you might as well just go 2 foot and make your life easier. There's another important thing about tape measures that I wanted to include. Now you might notice that there's some movement, some dingle in the dangle there on the end of most tape measures. Well, what that does is when you're hooked on, it pulls to its full length to give you an accurate measurement. But when you're butting up against something, it actually sucks itself in to account for the thickness of the hook itself. So it's not actually going to give you an inaccurate measurement. What it's doing is giving you a much more accurate measurement because it's already self-adjusting for the thickness of the claw. This one's not a huge deal because it's about a 16th, but there are ones that are significantly thicker that could throw off a measurement if you have to do a lot more close measuring. So if it's got a bit of a dingle in the dangle there, it's actually okay. Now there are cheap ones that move a lot. Those are bad ones. Don't buy those ones. But if it's just got the little bit of give to account for the thickness of the hook, you're all good. Now this is a cool little trick, and it'll come in handy for the hobby woodworker a lot too, more so than somebody who's framing houses. So when you want to put a nail into a board, especially something that's kind of thin, and you got to go kind of near the end, you're probably going to crack the board. So there's a way to get around that. All you do is you take your hammer and you kind of just blunt the end of the nail. Now it's not super easy to do while you're just holding it, but that's the idea. Put it against something concrete or something hard and blunt it. I'll show you how that works. So this is what typically happens when you try to nail a larger size nail through a thin piece of wood, kind of close to the edge. You're going to get a crack, and I mean, that nail is not doing anything because you can just break the whole piece apart. However, with the blunted nail, you'll see that it's in and there's no cracking. So this is the one that I blunted off of the end of the hammer, and yep, you can put it in and you don't end up splitting your wood. This tip or trick is more a tool than like a normal hack or whatever, but it's one of these. They look a little different, but they're all kind of the same thing. They're all nail pullers. This is DeWalt version. Estwing makes a really good version, but you've got the, I think they call them cat's claws on a lot of people. So you got a flat end and you got the other end, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to pull big nails out with this thing. This one's got an extra one. Not a lot of them have it. This is a dimpler. So what you do is you take it, put it around your nail, smack her a few times. Now it's dimpled the wood around it so that it's easier to get this claw part underneath it. Do little hits, and then you kind of have to work it. Basically, you just got to get it to a point that you get it that far out, and then you use your actual hammer claw. Typically, you're not using a small piece of wood that is just clamped down and you're building a wall or something, so the piece doesn't move. So I struggled a little bit more than I should have, but the idea is there. You hammer it in, and then you can use it as leverage to pry it out. You can smash your hammer against it. This thing is resilient. I've had it for probably close to 10 years, and it's been through everything, and it still works awesome. So there you have it. It's just a couple of really quick tips and tricks that come in handy more often than you think. Learning how to read a measuring tape is probably one of the biggest skills. I know it's an imperial and it doesn't make sense, but that's easier to measure out than counting out little millimeters. So I don't typically agree with the States on a lot of things, but imperial measurements for wood and laying things out, they do make things a little bit easier sometimes. A 16th is easier to round off to than a 20th millimeter or whatever it is. So yeah, so a couple of tips and tricks there. If you have any that you use on the regular, let me know, and just we can do some more. I can test them out myself and see if I like them, and I'll come up with a few more that I use, and we'll make another video of this, so you guys can do all your projects and nail it yourself.